Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. It's that time of the year. The offseason is upon us for a few teams already, of course, as we progress throughout the play-in and NBA playoffs. More and more teams will enter that offseason stage. But first, we're going to talk about the San Antonio Spurs. First of all, a huge shout out to all my Spurs fans watching. You guys are some of the most supportive viewers on the channel, so I want to thank you guys big time. You guys are so awesome. What a supportive fan base you are for your San Antonio Spurs. And if you are excited for the next stage, the next iteration of this team, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. I find myself very optimistic about the future of the San Antonio Spurs. And let's get into this video preview right away. What are we going to discuss in this offseason preview? First of all, we'll talk about this past season a bit. What did we see? What did we learn? What do we know about this team going into the future? Because that's really where you have to start. In order to understand the best next steps for this team and this franchise, you have to take a look at where they currently are and what we currently know about this team. We're then going to look at the NBA draft, both the lottery odds that the San Antonio Spurs have for their own pick, potentially the Atlanta Hawks pick, which we'll talk about, and then the NBA draft prospects they could consider with both of their first round picks. That will be obviously a huge topic of discussion in this video. We'll then look at the NBA free agency situation for this team, some trade possibilities as well, so we'll have a good understanding of how much money do the Spurs have to spend, how could they go about spending, and then also look at some names on the market that would be available for the right price. Then also an early outlook for next season. So this is going to be a very all-encompassing video. Everything you need to know about the San Antonio Spurs' potential plans this offseason, ways to improve their team, and what next season really could look like for this really young, ever-improving San Antonio Spurs roster. So just like we promised, let's start with that season recap here from the 2024-2025 season. The Spurs finished with a 34-48 record, kind of along the lines of what I had predicted for this team a year ago, saying how I thought this team was going to comfortably win more than 30 games and a little bit closer to 40. I had that 30 to 40 range before last offseason, before the pickups of Harrison Barnes, before the pickup of Chris Paul. And the reason for that specifically was I was, kind of projecting that individual growth for Victor Wembanyama, and we saw that this season. Obviously, his season was shortened, unfortunately, due to that blood clot issue, and we all need to hold our breath collectively for Victor Wembanyama. The last thing any NBA fan should want right now, whether you're a Spurs fan or not, is the shortening of his career. We all need him to be healthy. It is best for the game. It is best for the NBA. Victor Wembanyama is going to be the face of the league as he deserves, because he is going to be the best player of this generation, post LeBron James, including the generation that has Luka Doncic, Jason Tatum, Nickeil Jokic, who's making his own really great case. Obviously, you look at Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, what he's doing in Oklahoma City. There's so many great players in the league right now, and Wembanyama at 7'5" with his defensive versatility, his rim protection capabilities, and ever-growing offensive talent, he has what it takes to be one of the 3 to 5 best players in NBA history. So us as NBA fans need him to be healthy and want him to be active, able to participate and play in as many games as possible. So that's a huge thing. Now for the Spurs, what's a huge problem for them around Wembanyama? The inability so far to build a good NBA defense. Their 117.2 team defensive rating this year was rather lackluster. They improved their offense quite dramatically in this past year, going from 110 offensive rating to about 114 plus offensive rating on the year, and including, playing a young rookie like Stephon Castle heavy minutes and losing Victor Wembanyama for the second half of the season. The Spurs were still very competitive and had a much better offense this year than they did a year ago. So the offense took some meaningful steps forward. The defense a little bit, but you would think around Wembanyama, around a generational defensive prospect who has such huge impact when he's on the floor, that the Spurs team as a whole would be a better defense than they are. And I think that points to some of the current flaws on their existing roster in terms of, continuity, experience, defensive IQ, and feel. And I think there's a lot of things yet for San Antonio to clear up. Now, they do have draft picks and possible ways to improve their team going into the offseason, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. But I think for me, that's one of the big things every time I watch them is Wembanyama does so many great things defensively, but the team defense still isn't great. Obviously, Greg Popovich, another person we need to be hoping ends up getting right after his stroke this year. I'm really hoping and praying for the best for Greg Popovich. He's a wonderful person. I had the privilege of meeting him a year and a half ago or so at this point. So I'm really, really hoping for the best for him. But this team also made a huge trade. So it's okay to, maybe dampen your expectations a little bit for what happened this year, because they kind of blew up the roster a little bit, made a big trade, brought in De'Aaron Fox in what was a big-time trade and a trade that really didn't have a lot of downside long-term for the San Antonio Spurs. Now, there is a little nugget or nuance in that trade that is going to kind of hamstring the San Antonio Spurs just a little bit that we'll talk about. But De'Aaron Fox, the talent that he is, the shot-making upside, especially out of pull-up jump shots, something he's excelled at in his most recent seasons with Sacramento. You go back to their playoff run where they went into a 7-game series against Golden State. De'Aaron Fox was brilliant in the postseason in his one playoff appearance. So you would have to think moving forward that for San Antonio specifically, De'Aaron Fox is going to be a really effective, high-engine offensive generation point for the Spurs around Wembanyama, something they just clearly did not have. And they have other players who are capable of creating for themselves and for others a bit. Devin Vassell, I think a lot of Spurs fans were disappointed with the year that he had, not really improving in terms of the consistency and the defensive side of the floor especially, but I am still really holding on to my Devin Vassell stock. I think this kid's going to be really good. I believe in everything still that I did when he was coming out of Florida State in his draft class. I'm a big Devin Vassell guy. I think holding some of that patience and understanding that the process for him as a scorer, as a consistent kind of third option, isn't going to be super reliable or super consistent night in, night out in terms of what kinds of looks he gets constantly. And I think as time progresses here, as Wembanyama continues to develop, and as this team kind of starts to form that consistency with less roster turnover, no more big trades during the middle of the season probably, it's going to help him settle into that role, and hopefully we start to get some more of that consistency and stability from him as the season progresses and as the years go on. I think Vassell is going to be a mainstay there in San Antonio. I love his contract. It's not very expensive. It's something that I think is going to age quite well with the new CBA, specifically with the negatives of having three $30+ million per year players on your team. Vassell coming in quite a bit south of that $30 million a year number is quite beneficial in my opinion for San Antonio. Then Stephon Castle had such a great rookie season. My pick for rookie of the year, but I understand anyone else who's looking at Reese Shea, looking around the league at some of the other 2024 NBA draft rookies that have had productive seasons. I don't fault any other selections or picks really at this point, but I do think Castle did enough for me to deserve that award, specifically post Wembanyama missing the end of the season. Castle stepped up in a big way, produced from a volume stat standpoint quite well, and I think going into the future years, what we're really hoping to see is continued improvement as an efficient scorer. Especially beginning of the year, he struggled from an efficiency standpoint. That's okay to admit. I was quite high on Castle, despite some of the concerns I had about his efficiency as especially a jump shooter. Just coming out of UConn, that was one thing that was going to be the glaring weakness of him on a draft profile. But with Stephon Castle's ability to handle the rock, his two-way capabilities, during the draft cycle last year, I talked and raved about his screen navigation tools. And I think as he gets more comfortable in the NBA, progresses and matures his game a little bit more, those tools are going to continue to show up and pop in a big way. And then also the shot creation, the pull-up jump shooting, as those continue to progress and develop with the repetition he needs and the routine to kind of build out his game and flesh out his game a little bit, hopefully this offseason and moving forward, Stephon Castle can be a top 3, top 4-ish type player on a championship level squad around Victor Wembanyama. Chris Paul, what a season he had, led the Spurs in win shares this year. I think it had a really good bounce back year for him after the year he had in Golden State the year prior. And what I had deemed the Spurs doing this past offseason, which I don't fault them for at all, by the way, I had said that this team is competitive tanking. And what I meant by that was they weren't trying to be the worst team in the league. They were trying to win way more than 20 games. They weren't trying to be in that Wizards Jazz territory this season, but they also weren't stepping on the accelerator to make the playoffs. And I thought Chris Paul, Harrison Barnes, especially in the manner that they got both of those players, Chris Paul for a relatively cheap $10 million kind of contract, not very expensive at all. And then Harrison Barnes, part of a trade where they got draft capital, facilitating DeMar DeRozan to Sacramento, was just brilliant. Those two players were perfect competitive tanking moves for San Antonio. It didn't really lift the ceiling of this team too much. It didn't drastically alter the floor where they won 41, 42 games and really drastically hurt their draft odds or push their team into a spot where they didn't have future flexibility. They didn't hurt themselves in those ways and still got better, put pieces around Wembanyama that could usher in further development, and gave their backcourt a real mentor in Chris Paul, where we've seen his impact in a variety of NBA cities now, with him being a huge developmental guru for teams at times. I always think about his impact he had in Oklahoma City, his 1 year there, and the impact that I think that really had on Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And you're hoping here for, if you're a Spurs fan, that kind of hopeful impact for Stephon Castle, for some of the other young players and pieces there in San Antonio. And I thought not only did Chris Paul help them probably progress and learn, and you see his work habits and work ethic, everything like that, you also get to pick his brain for a year, and then you also get the benefit of seeing it on the court from an executive standpoint of, hey, what does it look like with a high volume ball handler, someone who can make reads out of the pick and roll at such a high level, someone who's a really good pocket passer who understands the nuances of the game at such a high level. And I think there was a lot of positives in terms of hitting Wembanyama in certain spots on the floor. I think back to that Christmas Day game a lot too. That was such a fun game to watch, obviously. And I think Chris Paul specifically really stood out to me with the way that he was getting Wembanyama the ball, and it was a huge day for Wemby on Christmas Day at the Garden, and I think CP3 was really one of the driving forces behind that. So all in all, a huge success story this year for San Antonio. And then also the wing combination. I talked about Harrison Barnes being, I think, a positive additive piece to this team. Obviously had a huge game-winning shot over Golden State at the end of the year that put the Warriors into a little bit of turmoil. And ultimately sent them to the play-in. But all is all, and all is well for Golden State. They're now a playoff team. And then you look at Jeremy Sochan, who I think is one of the more underrated players around the league. Obviously struggled a lot in year 2 of his career, especially at the beginning of the year. But I think there's a lot of people who overstate that. I talked to Greg Popovich about that experience for Jeremy Sochan, the benefits that brought him, and Popovich's quote really stood out to me, and I'll never forget it. He looked at me and told me it's a whole new world for him. And, he was basically admitting that Sochan was going through struggles and that it was something that was completely foreign to him. But I think this year we got to see some of the benefits from a playmaking standpoint, especially once he reverted back to more of his natural position and role on the team. Just a little bit more comfortability with the ball in his hands, a little bit quicker at making decisions, and a little bit better of a live processor. And that was the entire point of that experiment. Julian Champagnie, one of the best contracts in the entire league, extremely cheap, extremely affordable, and a really, really darn good shooter. I think he's been a very, very good piece for San Antonio, and someone who can be a long-term contributor for them, especially on that contract price point. It's really, really good. Keldon Johnson, I think, is a huge question mark at this point. The minutes really aren't there for him in terms of what you would kind of hope or imagine for a $17 million wing player. He's playing over 20 minutes per night, but he's not near that 30-minute threshold. And I think for the Spurs, there's a few ways you can look at Keldon. He can be a valuable trade chip to use. He can be, your sixth man, seventh man scoring type off the bench. There's a lot of different ways to envision Keldon Johnson. I don't think he's not valuable. I don't think he's just completely replaceable for this team. His scoring is valuable. His play off the wings in transition specifically is beneficial to this team. But at the same time, I don't think that Keldon Johnson's this irreplaceable wing player long-term for the Spurs either. So I think his contract's one of the more interesting things to watch for the Spurs moving forward at north of $17 million. So when it comes to the 2025 NBA Draft lottery odds for San Antonio, this is where things get really, really, really important. The Spurs are currently projected to hold the 8th overall pick in the draft, and their highest likelihood of picking 8th is due to a 34.5% chance to ultimately have the 8th overall pick on draft night. Now, the NBA Draft Lottery is a little bit over a month away at this point, just about a month away. So that 34.5% chance, while it's, their highest odds, it's not necessarily, in Sharpie or in pen right now that's where they're going to be picking. They do have a 26.2% chance to move up in the lottery into the top 4. If you guys want to know more about the NBA Draft Lottery, I do have a video on the channel that explains the NBA Draft Lottery and looks at the odds for all of the teams who are projected to be in the lottery at this point in time. But most importantly, and this is going to be one of the big questions, what are the odds for the first overall pick for San Antonio? 6.0% chance. So the Spurs have a 6% chance to ultimately land Cooper Flagg and pair him up with Victor Wembanyama for the next 5, 10, 15 years, and every single NBA team should be fearing this potential outcome. Not only is Cooper Flagg the best draft prospect in the 2025 NBA draft class, he's a very, very gifted two-way prospect who would be a brilliant fit with Victor Wembanyama. You think about the type of power forward you would want next to Wembanyama. Cooper Flagg checks every single box of what you could imagine next to Wembanyama to maximize both of their versatility offensively and defensively. You think about the combination in 45 action with Cooper Flagg handling the ball. Oh my gosh. You think about 54 action with Wembanyama handling the ball, Cooper Flagg being the roller or short roller. Oh my gosh. You think about defensively. Oh hey, we can blitz the ball with Cooper Flagg because we'll put a good athlete on the ball. It makes it harder to pass over the top. And even if they do effectively pass over the top, Wembanyama's back there to clean it all up. Or vice versa. You can have Wembanyama blitz more because you have Cooper Flagg's verticality and explosiveness as a defender and playmaker on that end of the floor behind all of that. It would be so fun. It would be so fun. But at the same time, while there is a very good chance that they move up in the draft, there's also a chance that they fall. A 32% chance that they move down to pick number 9, a near 7% chance that they fall to pick number 10 even, a 0.4% chance to pick at 11, and a 0.0 something percent chance to pick 12. That's not going to happen. They won't be picking 12 in the NBA draft. I guarantee it. I'd almost guarantee that they're not picking 11th either if I was a betting man, which I'm not. But pick 9, definitely a real possibility. Pick 10 is even a possibility, but so is pick 1. So you got to be excited. And then the Spurs also should be awaiting the Atlanta Hawks play-in results. Obviously, the Hawks lost their first play-in game against the Orlando Magic. The Spurs own that Atlanta Hawks 2025 first-round pick unprotected. So they very well could have a second lottery pick if the Hawks lose to the Miami Heat in the play-in. Well, all of a sudden the Spurs' chance at Cooper Flagg goes up another 0.5% or so because you'd have a second pick in the mix. So who knows what's going to happen, right? We've seen crazy things happen. Atlanta moved up in the lottery last year all the way up to number 1 for Zachary Rissache. A lot of crazy things could happen. The Spurs could very well have 2 lottery picks, so they'll have to stay tuned on the result of that Atlanta Hawks play-in game. So when it comes to NBA draft prospects in 2025 who make a lot of sense, we're going to first talk about players and prospects in the draft range of that first pick, anywhere from possibly pick 1, 2, 3, or 4 if they move up in the lottery, or kind of in that 8, 9, 10 range if they do end up falling down a little bit, or just standing pat at pick number 8. Obviously, the headliners, Cooper Flagg, Dylan Harper, those are the top 2 prospects perceivably right now in the 2025 NBA draft. I'm not committed to that yet on my big board, but that's probably where I'm going to end up, just admittedly. Cooper Flagg is the number 1 prospect. I am very confident in sharing that with everybody. I think everyone already knows that. Cooper Flagg is legit. We talked about how he could be such a great fit in San Antonio. If they got the second pick, it would be really interesting because they just made a huge trade for a franchise point guard in De'Aaron Fox. Do you just go with the talent and take someone like Dylan Harper? The answer probably from Spurs fans would be a resounding yes. Because of his positional size, you don't have to just pigeonhole him into being a true point guard, and having another very talented ball handler creator, even though the existence of Stephon Castle is obviously very prevalent in San Antonio, I don't think you would want to pass up on Dylan Harper. But if they got picked 3 or 4, that's where things get really interesting. VJ Edgecombe, obviously a two-way guard who has some offensive upside and some real flashes. Such an elite athletic profile, and then defensively I think is going to be really gifted. He would be a fun add next to Stephon Castle. That backcourt could wreak havoc on teams, especially if there is some shooting progression from both of them. Otherwise, you look at the huge swing boomer bust prospect in this draft, Ace Bailey, who had a very, very bad season for Rutgers, but obviously some NBA executives, GMs, and a lot of NBA draft analysts still do believe big time in Ace Bailey. I'm a little less committal toward Ace Bailey than others, but I do see some of the upside. Obviously, would be a really interesting fit there in San Antonio. Otherwise, you could look at big men. Do you want to pair another big body, another big frame next to Victor Wembanyama long term? There's a couple of different options. Khaman Maluach, someone who's exclusively a rim running lob threat, has really good touch around the basket, has shot a little bit from behind the arc. Think back to his time with Basketball African League, playing for South Sudan in the Olympics. He showcased that three-pointer a little bit. And then at Duke, we just saw some small flashes of it. Not anything consistent, not anything that I'd be willing to bank on yet to project him as a long-term stretch big man. But what he does really well is he screens, he rolls, he catches, he screens off ball really well. There's so much value to that. So, he's another huge human being at about 7'2". His combination of size and touch and screen setting specifically would make him, I think, a very fun partner with Victor Wembanyama. Remember, we're focused on trying to improve that defense. Khaman Maluach was such an impactful defender for Duke this year, eliminating shots at the rim, something Wembanyama already does. The two of them playing 48 minutes of center play, and then obviously you'd have to try and figure out how they fit together too. It would be menacing for teams to try and score at the rim, that's for sure. Derik Queen probably a little bit more of a natural fit next to Wembanyama offensively. Derik Queen, another big man who can face up, has some similar tools and traits offensively to Wembanyama. Now, he's not 7'5". He's not a generational prospect like I felt Wembanyama was for all of the reasons I listed throughout the entire 2023 NBA draft process. But, Derik Queen, I still think is a very gifted big man, someone who gets to the free throw line a ton, can handle the ball, can trigger into dribble handoffs, and is comfortable playing with another big man. You think about his success he found at Maryland, playing next to Julian Reese. Now, the reality is the college game is a lot different than the NBA game, especially, in terms of spacing and pace. So does that look a little bit different? For sure it does, but, Wembanyama is a lot better than Julian Reese is too. So keep that in mind if you're kind of projecting what that fit could look like. And then you get into the shooting component where, hey, if we want to add some wing players who can really shoot the ball, you look at Kon Knueppel, someone who I continue to love as a mock selection for the San Antonio Spurs. Shot 40% from three this year on very good volume. Had a solid, not elite, but respectable free throw rate. Someone who I think plays off of 2 feet, is very avoidant of errors. He's not going to turn over the ball a ton. He's not going to make a ton of mistakes. Now, he does have a limited ceiling from an athletic standpoint. Other people are going to point at guys like Ace Bailey who have way higher ceilings, but I think the floor for those players is significantly lower because Kon Knueppel's footwork is way better than Ace Bailey. He attacks closeouts way better than Ace Bailey does, and he's a lot more of a sound decision maker and honestly facilitator too of the basketball, which adds more connectivity into your offense around Fox and Wemby. Trey Johnson, obviously another elite three-point shooter, very, very good off of movement, and I think a higher upside than Kon Knueppel too. He's just slightly a better athlete in my opinion. Well, not even slightly. I think, a pretty notable improvement athletically over Kon Knueppel. And then I also think for Trey Johnson, someone who's a more confident pull-up three-point shooter, I think his processing speed has a little bit of a ways to go for him to ever be considered a true guard prospect. I look at him predominantly playing off the basketball, but I think in San Antonio, that's exactly what you'd be looking for, players who can fit and thrive in a role where they don't need the ball. They, in fact, thrive playing off of it, around Wemby, around Fox. Obviously, Sochan can handle the ball and make decisions a bit too. Vassell can handle the ball and make plays. So I think San Antonio right now, you're not looking for this huge influx of more ball handling unless you get a top 2 pick where Flagg or Harper just make so much sense. Colin Murray-Boyles is another guy who could be really connective. A lot of people point to CMB as a great fit for San Antonio because a lot of draft analysts, myself somewhat included, feel like for Colin Murray-Boyles to be super successful, playing next to a stretch big man is going to really elevate his game. But I think the flip side of the coin is that the best for a team that already has a stretch big man? Obviously everyone's looking at it from a lens of how do we make CMB work, but in my perspective, what makes the Spurs the best? And while Colin Murray-Boyles' best outcome might be landing in San Antonio, is that really the Spurs' best outcome? Or could they look at someone like Kon Knueppel, who's a better off-ball fit, someone who stretches the floor, plays off the catch quicker, better than Colin Murray-Boyles, and has more shooting gravity, significantly more shooting gravity? What does that do for the Spurs offense compared to Colin Murray-Boyles? Now, Collin Murray-Boyles could be an elite connective defender for this team. Obviously, his playmaking would be really additive as well. So I'm not saying that Collin Murray-Boyles wouldn't be awesome or good for San Antonio. The question for the Spurs, though, is which one of these prospects at their pick, whether it be 8, 9, 10, or 1, 2, 3, or 4, which one of these prospects here makes them the best, not which prospect can we make look better than they really are. And I think that's a really important question to remember when it comes to evaluating fits and landing spots for draft prospects. Also, with that Atlanta Hawks pick, remember that could be pick 15, pick 16 kind of range here, depending on what happens in the play-in, or it could be as high as pick 1, 2, 3, or 4 through the lottery, or more likely than not 13 or 14, depending on what happens in the play-in results. But there are some other prospects to consider, and we're kind of looking for more wing type players or bigger frame players. Noah Sengue, someone who's a play finisher out of Germany this year, has had a lot of success playing off of fellow draft prospect Ben Saraf for Ulm this year, and Noah Sengue shooting the ball well, finishing in transition very effectively. He's a really good corner cutter, lob catcher, has had a ton of success playing off the ball, so I think a very good natural fit here for San Antonio and offers very good length and size into their front court. Carter Bryant is someone with massive athletic tools. He's extremely explosive, a very good 1-foot and 2-foot jumper, and someone who displays that functionally on the basketball court as well as a corner cutter. You're going to kind of get into this similar territory of what you're looking for with this pick from Atlanta, and you're looking for guys who fit off the ball well, who can defend, offer really good positional size, length, physical tools, and then also can fit off the basketball. Carter Bryant shot the ball extremely well this year for the Wildcats in Arizona. A ton of success in his freshman season, very low usage rate, about a 16% usage rate only, but that's exactly, again, what you're envisioning his role being in San Antonio, which makes it very, very easy to feel comfortable possibly selecting him if he's still on the board even at this point of the draft. Liam McNeely had a real down year. You compare where his draft stock was a year ago coming out of Montverde Academy to where it is now after his lone season at UConn, significantly down in my opinion. And that's unfortunate for Liam McNeely, and I think it was a byproduct of the Huskies not having a true point guard and a ton of playmaking that they've had in years past, with Donovan Clingan being a playmaking hub for them, Stephon Castle. Obviously Spurs fans know that getting someone from UConn can end up being a really good thing. I think Liam McNeely would be a pretty good fit in San Antonio. I think he would really benefit from the spacing. So if they do go a non-shooting route at pick number 8, like let's say they go with Collin Murray-Boyles, well, then at that point, maybe you want to come back and get shooting at 13, 14, 15, wherever this pick ends up being with Liam McNeely at that spot. Danny Wolf, probably not going to be the pick here. I don't think this is going to help their defense a ton, but man, would it be fun seeing 45 action. Danny Wolf had so much success with Vlad Golden there for the Michigan Wolverines. Could you imagine him doing that with Victor Wembanyama? It would just be a lot of fun to watch. That's like my secret, hey, this would be awesome to see. I would just enjoy it a ton. It's probably not going to be the pick, and again, I don't think it's the best pick for them to make, but it would be a lot of fun to watch. Rasheer Fleming, definitely a player that I know a lot of Spurs fans are very, very interested in landing on draft night this year. Someone who was extremely productive for St. Joseph's, and really thrived in a play finishing role. Obviously was a huge part of their offense, but really projects to be a unique 3-and-D player. Really struggles at driving the ball, but is a unique cutter. Obviously played out of the paint quite a bit for St. Joseph's this year in transition and kind of, seals, post-ups, some unique ways to get him the ball there as their best player for St. Joseph's. But most specifically in the NBA, you're projecting him to be a 3-and-D wing with good length, size. You're kind of hopeful for probably some type of Tari Eason development to being that kind of defensive player where he can guard up and down the lineup a little bit, offers elite length and very good athletic tools. Asa Newell, you can look at him as like a backup 5. This is where 48 minutes of good center play would be, again, extremely important. I talked about that with Maluach and Derik Queen as possible fits in San Antonio. Asa Newell, a very simplified version of that. He screen and roll, get him the ball. He's got very good touch, finish around the rim, shot about 62% on twos this season, and is an elite offensive rebounder, averaged over 3 offensive rebounds a game for Georgia, and really elevated the Georgia offense, specifically when he was on the floor, over 130 offensive rating, and a large part of that was because of second chance opportunities for those Bulldogs. Thomas Sorber, kind of more of a project pick. Don't really expect him to be the selection at that point, but someone who does have very unique defensive tools, decent positional size as kind of this hybrid tweener forward / maybe small ballish kind of center. Would be an interesting landing spot for sure. And then Adou Thiero, someone who I really like, probably won't be the pick just given where his projected draft range is right now for me. I do think he'll probably be a pick in the 20s in this year's draft, although I do think teams should really start considering him kind of in and outside the lottery in that range because of his functional tools. He's a really, really great athlete. Honestly, in a lot of ways, reminds me of OG Anunoby. I think a smaller version of that, not quite as physically imposing as OG Anunoby, but still very functional as a cutter shot, over 60% on 2-pointers this year as a wing. You watch him play, he can dunk off of 2 feet extremely well in traffic, in a crowd. He can rise above defenders. And then defensively, he really, really impresses me with his impact as a team defender. He's not going to be the type of guy that you just go put on Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, you throw him at Luka Doncic and say, oh, go get stops for us. But I think defensively he can be really impactful in the gaps, has a really strong physical frame to him where he can match up and down the lineup a bit. You can throw him at different guys on different nights. And then also has the IQ, the positioning, the wingspan, the physical gifts to be impactful off the ball as a gap defender, a low man, a nail helper, really, really useful defensively. And again, if one of our big goals for San Antonio moving forward is to improve this defense, when Wemby's on the court and when Wemby's off, you need more impactful guys. And Adou Thiero, someone who I do think would be a very, very fun fit and an effective, good, impactful fit for San Antonio's defense especially. Then we look at their NBA free agency situation. Now, this is a lot of nuance here. There is a pathway for the Spurs having about $8.8 million or so in cap space, and that's not including a Keldon Johnson trade. That's not including a Devin Vassell trade. That's just flat out if they renounce certain guys and move off of certain contracts, they could get to about $8.8 million. Now, I don't really think that's likely. I think it's more likely they kind of go into this offseason with about negative $18.9 million in cap space. The wonderful thing about that is they still have plenty of room from the luxury tax, a ton of room from the first apron, and a plethora of room from the second apron. The Spurs will not be a second apron team. They won't be a first apron team. Heck, they'll probably not even be a luxury tax team this year, and that's a good thing. The Spurs team has been all about flexibility. That's what they continue to do. Now, they are going to lose that a little bit here. We're just going to talk about that in a second. But Chris Paul is an unrestricted free agent, obviously had a huge impact for this team. I talked about his win shares. I talked about the presence and value of his mentoring and leadership. I thought there was a lot of value from him both on the court and off the court for this team this season. He has a $12.6 million cap hold. The wonderful thing is his next contract, if he does sign another one-year deal in San Antonio, is going to be drastically cheaper than that $12.6 million number. So with that in mind, if they sign him to another $10 million deal, they go down to about negative $16.9 million in cap space, which would open up a little bit more wiggle room against the tax, and it opens up more possibilities for trades or free agent signings. What they do have for them is the non-tax mid-level exception, which is going to be really useful. That's obviously a really great tool. They could either keep that open for trades in the season, which very likely they could. Spurs fans, if you look at what OKC does and a lot of the other smart franchises, that's something that is a real pathway for San Antonio to extrapolate and get more assets from teams working as a third team facilitator of trade, something the Spurs have been really awesome at in recent years. Charles Bassey's contract's non-fully guaranteed. Now, I do think the Spurs will keep him around probably. When it comes to the flexibility, though, this is where they lose a little bit of it because you traded for De'Aaron Fox. You gave up meaningful assets, 2 first-round picks, 5 second-round picks. You gave up, in the trade, a couple of players too, not super valuable ones, but Trey Jones, Zach Collins, players who, at one point in time, Spurs fans did like. De'Aaron Fox, you traded for him. You committed draft picks. You committed some pieces. You're going to have to extend him. And that number is going to be expensive. And that's okay. I'm not saying this is a terrible thing. I'm not saying don't extend De'Aaron Fox. But I'm just saying that number is going to be hefty. So this is where you lose some of that flexibility because you think about, okay, well, Wembanyama at some point will be on a super max. De'Aaron Fox is going to be making a lot of money. That's a lot of money committed to the top 2 guys of our roster, and that's where the draft picks, that's where the flexibility going forward is going to be really important, and the Spurs have protected themselves against that. You think about the trades that they made last year, giving up pick 8, which became Rob Dillingham to Minnesota. they got more assets. They were able to use that in the trade for De'Aaron Fox, and they were able to, set themselves up to hold, the futures of other teams. 2030 swap with Dallas, for example, as, points of how they've been able to extend their window even while their roster is expensive. They have movable contracts as well. Blake Wesley, Malachi Branham. Could they trade those two younger players? Definitely. I'm sure, teams like Washington, Utah maybe would have some interest there. They have ways of getting off of some of these salaries. Now, I don't think it's going to be the biggest priority for San Antonio. Those contracts are not huge. And with the way the Spurs are going to be operating, I think while looking at free agents is going to be beneficial for them and they could definitely improve their team, it's not a, oh no, we didn't get anybody, what a disaster offseason. So keep that in mind. Who are some NBA free agent targets they could go after? I like Myles Turner in Indiana if they do want to pair another big man with Wembanyama. Obviously, Myles Turner would be a very, very good one. Although, again, I don't think that's best for the overall team-building philosophy there in San Antonio. I just don't think another center is really what the Spurs need. I think looking at lengthy, defensive-minded wings would be the most beneficial pathway. So, to me, you can kind of cross Myles Turner off the list, but I wanted to list him in case the Spurs do consider him. Jonathan Kuminga, really interesting dilemma going on. Obviously, his minutes have been quite slashed by the head coach there in Golden State, Steve Kerr. And Kuminga, who's a restricted free agent, is not in line for this huge, massive payday like, a year ago we might have assumed he would get. So could Kuminga land in San Antonio? Would be fun, would be interesting, but I don't really think that's the way they go. Minnesota's the team we really need to talk about. They have huge financial constraints there. New ownership, obviously, probably looking to keep this team very, very competitive around Anthony Edwards, especially with Tim Connolly as the president there of basketball operations. We know that the Timberwolves are going to try to be a very good competitive team, but they are at a crossroads here. Julius Randle has a player option. Pretty expensive. Does he opt in? And if so, do the Wolves look to salary dump him or try and trade him somewhere in order to keep Naz Reid and Nickeil Alexander-Walker? For me, if I'm Minnesota, I would not want to lose Naz Reid, and I do not want to lose Nickeil Alexander-Walker. I think those two players are such integral long-term pieces next to Anthony Edwards. The issue for Minnesota, there is going to be a massive market for both of those players. I think a significantly smaller market for Julius Randle. Randle could help the Spurs. I included him here because I do think his talents, his skill set would be very, very good next to Victor Wembanyama. A lot of players would be very good next to Victor Wembanyama, in my opinion. But Naz Reid, Nickeil Alexander-Walker are really the crown jewels coming out of Minnesota this offseason as potential free agents. Spurs fans I know would love to get Naz Reid. He would be absolutely fantastic for them. Nickeil Alexander-Walker would be another really valuable, one of the most under-the-radar players in the entire NBA because of his 3-and-D capabilities and plus playmaking. He's not a point guard, but at times he brings the ball up the floor, can be connective, and can be a drive and kick player. He's very ambidextrous as a passer, likes to use his left and right hand quite a bit, and he's got very good playmaking feel, vision, understanding of how team defenses rotate. Nickeil, I think, would be really good in San Antonio as a play finishing plus playmaker for them. And Naz Reid is one of the quickest release, unique ball handlers in the entire league because of his size, quickness, athletic tools, and he's really drastically improved as a defender the last couple of years as well. So Naz Reid would be fantastic in San Antonio. He should be the headline target for the Spurs. And if it's not him, someone like Santi Aldama fits a lot of that criteria as well. A 7-foot, very versatile offensive player who can shoot the ball, can attack closeouts, can make the extra pass, very smart, cerebral player, and brings a defensive edge as well. Santi Aldama is one of my favorite role players in the league to watch. Nickeil Alexander-Walker checks that box for me as well. We had the report a few months ago about Josh Giddey and some potential interest from the Spurs organization. The Bulls are going to re-sign him. The Bulls are not going to let Josh Giddey go. So, I wanted to include him because I do think with that report, I do think there's legitimacy behind some of the Spurs' interest. But ultimately, I do not think Josh Giddey will be a Spur. I think he will stay in Chicago, but I wanted to include him on the graphic for sure. Big trade targets. Very quickly, I don't think the Spurs are going to do any of these, but I wanted to talk about them. Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, both very likely could be on the move. Kevin Durant definitely will be traded this offseason. I would bet on that. And again, I'm not a betting man, but I would bet on that. Devin Booker very likely could get traded. It will require a trade request from Devin Booker for him to get dealt. more likely than not, the Suns extend him for a ton of money, but he deserves it. He's Devin Booker. He's a great top 20 player in the league. Kevin Durant, 37 years old, I would stay ways away. I would not trade for Kevin Durant. I think that any team that does trade for Kevin Durant is destined to lose the trade. His impact is not nearly as good as his counting stats are, even while his impact and efficiency offensively is still very, very great. He is not an elite team defender anymore at this point. He cannot individually guard one-on-one out in isolation against the league's best players. He is not the Kevin Durant we saw in Golden State. He is not the Kevin Durant he was in Oklahoma City. It's not to say he's not a very good player still. He clearly is. But at 37 years old, at his salary price, and how much it would take to trade for him, presumably for Phoenix to be willing to get rid of him, I would not do it. I would not even think about doing it if I'm San Antonio. Lauri Markkanen, I would really love to see. Lauri Markkanen, you think about the value of his size. I think one of the more underrated defenders in the league. Obviously, I think had a really bad year for Utah defensively, but if you look at the guard play specifically there defensively from Keontae George and Isaiah Collier, I think there's a lot more to blame than just Lauri Markkanen defensively for that perspective in Utah. And then obviously he's such a great play finisher. He could fit so easily as a third guy off of Fox and Wemby. But again, the problem with that is he's going to be expensive given his new contract that the Jazz signed him to, so I'd stay away. Giannis, if he asked for a trade, I mean, Giannis would be so great in San Antonio that it's hard to say don't do it, but I just don't think it's going to happen. Michael Porter Jr., he's really expensive. I wouldn't do it, but he is going to be someone who has his name come up quite a bit. I wanted to include him because he is a very good off-ball player, movement shooter, cutter, and he rebounds the ball really well. I think he's a little underrated in league circles, but at the end of the day, he's probably still not worth his price tag, so I would probably avoid him, stay away from him as a trade target or candidate. So going into next season, what do I expect? What does the Spurs offseason overall look like, and how good will they be next year? First of all, I think the Spurs do strongly consider stepping on the accelerator. Now, it doesn't have to be a massive move. It doesn't have to be a trade for Giannis or a trade for Kevin Durant or Devin Booker. It doesn't have to be Lauri Markkanen. It could just be Naz Reid. It could be Nickeil Alexander-Walker. It could be Julius Randle, even in an extreme version where they figure out some type of sign and trade or some deal that makes sense for both sides. Ultimately, I think the aspect that's going to really make that decision for San Antonio is going to be the lottery pick positioning. If they move up in the draft to pick 3 or 4, it becomes a huge trade chip that could help them get any player they really want. If they get pick number 1, it's hey, we're not making any trades. We're drafting Cooper Flagg and we're set for the next 10 years. If they get pick 2, it's, hey, we have Dylan Harper and we're going to be very happy. Their lottery pick positioning is going to be very, very important. At pick 8 or 9, is it a good trade chip? It definitely is. They also have that Hawks pick that they could trade out to future years, just like they did last year with that Wolves pick. So right now, the Spurs could balance being aggressive and being conservative. They could trade one of their 2 picks for a player now, and they could trade the other pick for future picks and keep their window open long term while also opening their window up a little earlier by improving their team currently. I do think the Spurs are going to have a 40-plus win season. Of course, that is banking on Wembanyama being healthy, being able to play, and being able to play 65 to 75-ish games, right? You have to expect him to be healthy, and if he is, the Spurs are going to be very good because he is going to be a top 5 player in the world next year. I very, very confidently believe that. The Spurs, what I really do think, and this is going to be the headliner of their offseason, they can maintain the flexibility that they have right now while improving their team currently too. At the end of the day, what the Spurs are looking to do, and you can tell from all of their moves, all of the decisions, the 3-team trades, they signed a trade where they sent DeRozan to Chicago the first time, the trade where they sent DeJounte Murray to Atlanta. They were valuing their long-term window, getting future draft picks from teams that they were kind of betting against. Then at the same time, they made the 3-team trades, the one with Dallas regarding Grant Williams where they got that 2030 pick swap, the one with Minnesota where they're looking at the Wolves' long-term cap table and Anthony Edwards' contract extension saying, hey, in 2030, 2031, you might not be that great. We want that draft pick. And then obviously they used some of those assets in the De'Aaron Fox trade. They've improved their flexibility every single year, And it's helped them improve their team by landing a guy like De'Aaron Fox and taking advantage of the Kings, who are in a vulnerable position this trade deadline. So I think all in all, the Spurs have been very well ran. The front office is extremely smart. They're taking a cautious approach around Wembanyama while also setting themselves up for success by being able to improve the team when they want to and taking swings that are calculated risks with real reward as upside. I hope you guys did enjoy. Thank you all so much for watching. Let me know down in the comment section below which team you'd like to see next and what do you think the Spurs will ultimately do this offseason. Thanks again so much for watching. If you enjoyed, make sure to leave a like and subscribe, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.